The container is now open. Okay, so what does trauma-informed really mean? And can we ever make spaces truly trauma-informed? In the relational art of circling, this deep process brings up a lot of stuff that can be extremely triggering. And that's why a lot of people end up rejecting the practice altogether, because while that difficulty and intensity is what makes it such a powerful modality for personal development, it can also be why people consider these spaces not safe enough for them. To consider how we make these circling spaces more trauma-informed without losing depth, but actually expanding depth and making things more powerful, we talked to none other than John Thompson of Circling Europe. When his organization ran into these issues, they rolled up their sleeves and learned about how to be trauma-informed. And what resulted is something more grounded, arguably more profound. It's part 3 of the Containers interview with John Thompson, coming up now. I'm feeling called to move into the history of circling Europe. If I feel like kind of out of that bubble and into the next part of the conversation. The history of circling Europe and how that all developed. Also, how a couple of English guys ended up over in Holland all the time. What happened with that? Why is that where circling had to happen?
Yeah. Well, the first time we led was at this festival in Holland that was at this big retreat center. And actually, Sean met his girlfriend at that retreat, who's now his wife. And we ended up moving to Holland like shortly after that, partly because circling was taking off here slightly quicker than other places, but also just for fun. Like we had friends in Amsterdam and like it was cool place to be. But then, it did seem to go down a bit smoother here. Like there was in the UK, there was a bit more resistance to it, a bit more skepticism. But it has grown a lot in the UK. But maybe you want to ask me something. I don't know what to say.
I guess I'm curious about the founding of Circling Europe and the lifespan of that. What was that journey like for you? Because that's such an important institution in the history of circling.
It's 12 years this summer since that first retreat that we led. And we created Circling Europe shortly after that. But we actually created Circling Europe as a side project at the time. It was like we were actually investing a lot of money in a website and a new organization. And so we were like, let's just create a cheap website for Circling Europe. And because there's something there. Like that was an incredible retreat. People loved it. So the first year we were like, it was just on the side, and then at the end of that first year, we were like, man, we've got to follow this. Like, I don't know if we can really make money from this. I think we can, but the energy around this, we've got to follow. So we quit everything else and took some risks, and it just paid off. Like, so we went full time after that first year, and it grew really quick. Like within a year or two, like we came up with a festival that next summer, our own festival. And like I came up with it 3 weeks before we did it, and 60 people came and had life-changing experiences. And then the next year we had like 120 and it was filled. And we met incredible people along the way. So we were off, like 12 countries in the first few years. We're off just leading these weekend events and meeting fellow soul travelers, it felt like, who then we invited into the team to lead with us, and we would learn all kinds of things from them. And we would have training days before and after the weekends with them, and like even more crazy stuff would happen than in the weekends. And so amazing bonds with people, and just real adventure. Like it was off the charts what was happening in the workshops, and we didn't know why we were doing what we were doing, and we didn't have any reference point for it, but we just had this crazy aliveness, and people wanted it. And then we soon came up with this idea of like, let's do a 6-month training, the SAS. It's like people want to do more of it. We did like for us to integrate circling into our life, we had to practice it. We had to be like rigorous with it, like to really integrate it into life. Let's create it. Let's call it the SAS, like the British military service is like the SAS. We thought we were only going to do it once or twice at the time. We didn't know we'd end up doing like more than 50 around the world. So in a way, the name is a bit embarrassing, but it also captures a spirit of these two English guys that discovered something and were just like innocently excited and just like, yeah, let's just do this. And people came, and then we did these 6-month journeys, and that it's still like the kind of flagship in a way of what Circling Europe is that 6-month. In a way, you could see it as like an initiatory experience deep into circling. And 700, 800 people have been through that now, and we've now had the documentary made about it, which was amazing to get it like captured on camera so that people could actually feel it. But if I go back to those early years, so yeah, we brought other people into the organization. We were kind of co-creating. We created this thing called All There Is, which was with a third person. It was me, Sean, and Alanya, her name was, and she was just like this witchy person who I would just start having altered states. Like when she was in the room, I would feel like a totally different leader. Like I'd start to feel huge, like archetypal masculine energies or warrior energies, and I could feel it was linked to her being in the room. So we created this thing called All There Is, which was like almost like it was surrendered leadership, but it was like all there is, like bring all there is, but also just all there is, like it's already here. And that's when people started flying across the channel, like to these things, like, and we're only 2 or 3 years in, and yeah, packed out workshops and loads of spiritual things happening, crazy things, but also like some like pushing some edges, like trauma would come up, and like one person would like went home and was screaming, and then sort of like the neighbor upset the neighbors, and like that was, and then they came back in the next day and telling us that, and I'm a bit like, okay, like we're opening some powerful things here, and like, yeah, what are the edges, like, and we didn't, like, we had someone suicidal who came in, and we weren't like turning people away, because we had a sense of like this can help mental health issues, like these things need to be solved in community, or there's a unitive experience, like where while there's beautiful things in diagnosing people, like that can actually, the separation with the people can actually be part of the problem that's creating the mental health issue in the first place.
Yeah.
So there was this excitement of, but then after a few years of that, it was like we'd bitten off more than we could chew. And I remember just being out of my depth with some of the people I was working with. I just didn't, not many, but just one or two, I was like, I don't know what's going on in this person's psychology. And that's when, like, I'd been studying for years and trained as a coach, but that was like, we need to go deep, like we need deeper training in trauma. So this was after 5 or 6 years, and we're getting more pushback within the community at that time as well. And we had grown very quickly, and then we were just so open with everything. And the people in our Facebook group who had never even met us, and it's like we didn't have many boundaries. It was just like, we believe in this, and and it was like we got checked. There was like a bit of fallout within the community and pushback, and we did need to learn more about trauma, and we did, and we went off and trained for 3 years with NARM, and that did lead to a shift. I don't know how much was fear based because of like fear of cancellation and like the pushback that we had, but there was definitely wisdom in there that helped us, like, oh, we can make our circling better. We don't have to become therapeutic in our paradigm, but that wisdom of deeper knowledge of the psyche can actually make our circling better. And I would say the last 5 years has been more grounded. Like there hasn't been as crazy as stuff happening in a bad way. Like we've been more settled, more mature, more, and I guess it's consolidated and what else?
I'm curious if we could pause here, because I'm wanting to know more about what it's like to lead a circle in a trauma-informed way, how that education informs surrendered leadership, and it informs you as a circler or as a just a spirit forward person.
Yeah, it's a good and deep, complex question. Let's get in there. I definitely think like being more trauma informed just helps you see more clearly what's going on around you, and be more wise in terms of interacting with what's around you. And it doesn't mean that you suddenly have to become like a kind of classic therapist where like, okay, I know what's best for you now, you need to do this, everybody stop, I know what's right for the room, you do this, you do this. You don't have to kind of lose your humanity once you have that wisdom. You can actually still just circle from that place. It's like, oh, like I have this sense that like you're overwhelmed like right now, and maybe like, yeah, what do you need? Like, is there a way that you could resource yourself? Like, can we support you? That would be a way of like bringing in some knowledge of trauma without, like, I'm not going out of circling, I'm just responding to what's there. But also I learned, like, the way I was approaching things before was a bit more like, we've got to feel everything, we've got to feel the pain, we've got to get the anger out, not too much like that, but there was a bit of like nothing needs, even more non-goal orientation, like nothing needs to happen, we don't have to. So like, oh, look at the resources that are already here in the present, and that makes it in a way more trauma informed, but we're circling. But I also had this sense of like, when someone started to act out, like I got very good at noticing the difference between like just being someone being triggered and acting out versus like healthy anger. But rather than going to the person and like say, look, I think you're acting out, like maybe take some breaths, which you could do still in a certain way. It was like, oh, what's really going on when I'm with this person? Like, oh, I'm actually quite scared. So like, yeah, when someone gets into acting out, I start to feel a little unsafe. So I shared that with this person in this instance, and he was really softened by that. And then he like straight away like went inward of like, oh yeah, my anger, it's, oh yeah, I'm not getting my needs met. So I'd actually, like, my kind of deeper knowledge around trauma like helped inform me, but actually what I did was I circled.
That's awesome.
And I genuinely believe that like that people feel when another human is with them. So like 99% of the time, your best way to support someone who's in distress or highly triggered is like being honest, being compassionate, being with them, being curious about their experience. Like that's the problems seem to happen when we get out of that. And that's with fear around trauma and like we can actually create, be part of the problem if we're not careful. And so that's why the more wisdom you have, the better. But it can, I think it can come into circling in a way that just improves it and shows where a lot of circling is trauma informed. Like it's already set up based on that kind of wisdom. Like it's about connection. Like a lot of trauma is like linked to disconnection, and circling is all about finding connection and finding the connection that's there and exploring connection and being present together.
Mm. So then how have you seen circling be used that then traumatizes people with it having these kind of inborn practices that are sort of already trauma informed? How does it sometimes get off the rails in your view?
And well, that's where like what traumatizing is so in my, I think traumatized and getting traumatized or getting re-traumatized, I don't think is actually that accurate. I don't think it happens as much as people say it does.
Mm-hmm.
I think people get highly triggered and overwhelmed a lot, and that may or may not be a good thing. Like, as in, not that I would ever try and create triggers, but you're not going to get through life without getting triggered. And when you getting triggered gives you a learning opportunity that you might not solve then and there, but that the very fact that you were triggered is probably going to stay with you for some days and give you the chance to process. So being in an environment where you sometimes get triggered, like I would say, is again, it's not trying to trigger people. I'm not interested in that, but it just seems inevitable that life involves triggers, and that that can stimulate our growth, and or like we're going to grow through that. So a lot of traumatization is, it might not actually be that.
It's triggering.
Yeah, it's more triggering. It's triggering.
Yeah.
It's like it's something that's super hard for you to deal with. So then putting it in a trauma bracket isn't that useful, because it can actually, we're not, we're trying to manage something for someone, which is a part, which can be a part of it, but it's like, let's get to the root of this. Like what's really going on? Let's explore this.
Yeah.
And that can be done. Can re-traumatization happen in circling? Like if it's done badly, I would say yes. So if the facilitator is getting caught up in their own dynamics with participants, and like someone's just open to a really vulnerable place, and then that vulnerability triggers the facilitator and the facilitator starts lashing out at that person, I mean, yeah, it more comes down to the facilitator. And then even like some people who you say are highly traumatized, like maybe surfing isn't the best space because it maybe connection is particularly triggering, and the uncertainty just gets their activation levels up too high, that maybe it's not the right environment for them, and we can support those people to realize that and not be there. But for other people, it's like, yeah, so my most traumatic moments, a lot of them, like I don't regret having them. And they were like, that was me not being able to cope with that situation. That was the trauma. That was so I couldn't cope with that. But through processing that over time, I was able to integrate that experience, and that was a real life experience that happened to me.
Yeah.
So it's about supporting people to integrate what happens in real life to them. And yeah,
Right.
we don't want to have violence happening in workshops and things that, but a lot of it is like, yeah, these things happen in everyday life. How can we integrate from that and grow and learn? Even if it is like a trauma, that's something that was just overwhelming and too much.
Yeah.
Because it's incredible that we can be traumatized. Like we have this ability to dissociate and move away from reality to cope until we're in a resourced enough environment and well enough supported to be able to process that. I mean, that's incredibly useful.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm imagining that the more trauma informed one is, and the more able you are through gaining knowledge of trauma informed practices, and like the NARM training, that arms you, like that just prepares you for those moments when someone is extremely triggered in a circle, to be able to see and maybe empathize and like kind of just understand. And because you've prepared yourself in that way, you're probably in some ways less triggered yourself by that triggering, right? Like, because that's kind of, at least from my experience, when I've seen someone get into an intense state in a circle, it has an effect on me. And then that's where the trouble comes in, right? Like, that's where the trouble comes in, is that
Exactly.
I need to be fully resourced and grounded. And because I'm not quite there, everything can go off the rails. So and that ties back into exactly what you're saying about surrendered leadership. Like that's when I'm not surrendered anymore. It's like when
Right.
when I'm being triggered by someone else's trigger. And so that's, things can escalate and turn into a mess, and have
and will again.
and will again.
Yeah, I'm noticing too, there's something about using trauma education just as a way to see what's going on better, and then just to circle it. That is such a jujitsu move. I think in me, I've worried when collaborators who want to run circling events talk about being trauma informed. I worry, not through anything they've said, just through my own prejudices and biases, worry that the circling is going to get weak sauce, so that we don't ever, no one's feelings ever get hurt or something. And it feels so, honestly, it feels a lot like when you were describing surrendered leadership. It feels like this, oh yeah, there's this other move that was right there the whole time, of just the more you know about people, the more you see, and then you just circle what you're seeing. It's not, that for some reason that seemed obscure or not available to my imagination, and then hearing you describe it is really, really making me feel a lot differently. I'm feeling a lot of movement.
I've got another piece on this. It's like the way I relate to the whole movement around trauma, like the level of trauma informedness in the world these last 5 years, like through Gabor Mate and all those people. Like, I'm like super grateful for that, because they opened up portals or like understandings of how we function as humans that, like, it's amazing, that weren't visible to us, and they weren't visible to us in circling. And having that training and that seeing, like, opens up and allows us to be more skillful as we want to be, and compassionate and supportive of others. There's also like where it goes too far, where like a safe space becomes not a place where it's safe enough for us to really disagree and show up together. A safe space is like very boundaried, very tight, where the leader has total control over everything. And there's a way that the magic of circling could be lost if we were to go along that route and really believe that trauma informed means like closing things down in a particular way.
Yes.
And that's where it's like, the magic of circling could be lost, because the paradigm of what circling is would be taken over. and so your concern there is valid, I think, of like, hey, this isn't therapy, and the fact that we know this isn't therapy influences the whole thing of what's going on, and it allows for different things to happen, and that might not be right for this person who is particularly traumatized, but it also might be right for them. Like, and they get that. We inform them, and we give our best judgment of like if we think this is supportive for them, and then they get to make that adult choice as an adult.
It's conversations like these that make people say, boy, I wish I knew how I could support the podcast. And luckily, we have 2 easy ways to do that. The first is free. So if you're watching this on YouTube, like and subscribe, leave a comment. That helps us. Similarly, if you're listening to this as a podcast, rate and review. Share it with people who you think would get a lot out of it. That helps us as well, and those ways are free. Now, if you'd like to keep us clothed and fed and have the lights on while pumping money into the Enlightenment industrial complex, then you can become a patron on Patreon. Go ahead and go to your favorite website, patreon.com/thecontainer. Become a supporter by giving us small monthly donations. With that, let's go back to this extremely valuable material that you are likely consuming for free. Yeah, so I know a lot of our listeners are going to be curious how they get materials from Circling Europe, or how they go to retreats, what things are coming up this year. They're going to be interested in all that. So where do we send them?
CirclingEurope.com. It's got everything on it. We run free intro to circling events for anyone who hasn't tried it. We run them pretty regularly. Loads of online and in-person events around the world. Big festival in the Netherlands in the summer, which would be amazing to see you. I think the container should be present there this year.
It's over my birthday too.
It would be good. We'll see. We'll do a Patreon drive to send the container to.
And then also there's the circling documentary on YouTube. That if people want to know more about it, there's 4 episodes, easy to find on YouTube. It's also on the front page of the website.
Yeah, I've watched that, and I've been to the intro calls, which are awesome. Like, and we were talking earlier about how it's how you haven't had a lot of experience circling on Zoom, but I had a profound experience circling in an intro call from Circling Europe. So yeah, it works. Yeah, and this feels a little out of order, but I'm wondering if you have parting words as someone who has been on this path for longer than almost anyone in the circling community. Like, what are words that you have for people who are just discovering circling, or who have started their journey more recently? What words of wisdom do you have?
It's more like just hope and excitement for them. Like, I just hope that they can get what I've got from this practice and what you're getting, and like and also like feeling a responsibility around that, or maybe not, that's a bit strong, but like wanting people to have that kind of experience. And so if they're not getting that kind of experience, to like reach out, or like wonder why. And obviously there's so many modalities and different things for different people, and like but I think we've shown in this episode, like, yeah, some of the magic of what's possible within it. And I don't know that I have any wisdom other than like go, like, give it a go and like stay with it and see what happens. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen people. There are some people who walk in their first circle and you can just see them pop, and they're like, they're here and they're circling, and it's everything they want to do. And then there are other people who seem very averse to the practice, and it seems like they have other paths they need to walk. And then there's this other group I've observed who get a lot out of it and then aren't able or aren't quite putting together the regular practice. And I don't know, my heart like breaks for people who don't have it, either the availability for whatever reason. They can taste that circling thing, and they don't have the ability or the access to get that.
well, when you say, I think you said heartbreaking, and like my response is one of care towards that and curiosity, like what is happening with those people, and like both your response and my response, like kind of trust as the right response to that kind of thing. Like, yeah, what is really happening for those people, and your care around that, I imagine, would go a long way.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And your ability to inspire.
Well, John Thompson, thank you so much for coming onto the container with those final words. I'm just so grateful to spend time with you and get to know you a little bit and get to share this with everybody.
Is this your business, man, that you spoke of earlier? That just
Yeah. That was kind of my businessman being like, all right, let's shut it down and get to different kind of discussion. Yeah.
I'm curious about that part, like.
The container is now closed. This episode concludes our incredible 3-part discussion with John Thompson of Circling Europe. We want to extend an enormous thank you to John. He was wonderful to talk to, and he delivered some huge insights that we just continue to integrate in the weeks since we got to talk to him. And we'd like to make an announcement because the container is officially going to Circling Europe's International Circling Festival 2024 in the Netherlands. It's a 6-day extravaganza in August. It runs August 10th to the 15th. And I think that there are still tickets available. If you want to go to this, and who wouldn't, go to circlingeurope.com. Obviously, we'd like to see you there. If you'd like to check out what Circling Europe does, they also have these new weekly drop-ins. I think they do 2 a week, actually. And they only cost $20, and you get to circle on Zoom with the Circling Europe crew. As spring heats up and starts to turn into summer, we've got some awesome conversations coming up your way, so keep an eye out. We also have a lot of interesting side projects in the oven. It's a big year for the container. Let's keep it going. With that, we have a nice way of closing. Keep it namaste.